Hey everybody, this is Edan of LightCycleAstrology.com. Hope you're doing well out there, friends. Today we are taking a look at the astrology for October 2023, and we're doing a broad overview of the major transits of the month. Now, most astrologers do agree that the astrology for October is pretty potent and powerful. Definitely one of the most impactful or powerful or intense astrology months of 2023. So we're going to get into my take on why that. Mostly I agree with that statement. We're going to take a look at some interesting aspects that are going on as well in the month. And of course, this is a packed month with eclipses and all kinds of stuff. So we'll get into that in a moment. Before we do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos, and leave some comments in the comment section, especially with the more unique transits of the month. I would love to hear some stories, because some transits that are coming in the month, particularly the contra-anticias, are so fascinating and very rare, and I would love to get some stories on that if you guys have any. You can always go to my website, lightcycleastrology.com, if you feel like you want some more personalized astrological guidance where we can take a look and do a reading of your transits or zodiacal releasing, or anything that you are wanting to find more out about. If you have major changes coming up, readings are very affordable, and I typically prepare them for about a week. So I really throw every technique that I know at them and find out what is going on in the best way that I know how. So those are really, really great if you feel like you need some more personalized astrological guidance other than what we do just on the channel here. That being said, thank you so much, and we will get right into the content for today. October 2023 is starting in just a day or so. So I'm recording this on September the 30th. The reason that I'm doing that is because on September the 30th, we have a very, very unique aspect that is happening. It's called a contra-antiscia. And so that is where we are going to start the astrology for October. Even technically speaking, this is not in October, it's at the end of September, but it really is part of the October story. So let's go ahead and we'll pull up the real-time clock and begin our journey through October here. So we have this contra-antiscia, Mercury in a contra-antiscia to the sun. So let me describe what this is, because contra-anticias and antiscia aspects are one of the lesser known kinds of astrology aspects that are coming out of the ancient texts from Hellenistic or traditional or ancient astrology that we've been studying for only about 30 years from the ancient texts that we've been translating. Texts from Project Hindsight and people like Robert Smith and Robert Hand and Zoller, among others like Demeter George. These particular aspects are really, really fascinating. So, but they're hard to wrap their mind around, even when you take professional astrology courses and learning how to do professional astrology from some amazing astrologers. Even then, spending a lot of time on understanding what a contra-antiscia or an antiscia aspect is very technical and tricky, and it can be difficult to wrap your mind around it. So I'm going to try to just put it in a nutshell, and hopefully it makes sense. But what this is two planets that are straddling on either side of the equinox point. So right now, for instance, you'll see that here is Mercury at 23 degrees of Virgo. So Mercury has 7 more degrees to travel ahead in the zodiac before she reaches the autumnal equinox point, right? The autumn equinox between Virgo and Libra, right? And you'll see that the sun has already passed that point and is now about 7 degrees ahead in the sign of Libra. So what this does is, because these planets are both 7 degrees from the equinox point, Mercury being 7 degrees more to go and the sun being 7 degrees past. But because this equinox point is a point of equal light and equal darkness within one 24-hour rotation of the planet, That's why they obviously call it the equinox, but it means equal night, right? Equal daytime, equal night. 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark within one rotation of the planet. And because they're both equal distance away, but they're in, one is 7 before and one is 7 after. So the sun actually has 7 days or 7 degrees of darkness, because once a planet passes the equinox, it gets that much further into the darkness. The dark half of the year is overcoming the light. So there is more nighttime once you get past the equinox, right? Than there is daytime. So, 7 days past the equinox might be something like, it might only be a few minutes more of darkness. So it might be 11 and a half hours or something versus like 12 and 12. But that extra half an hour of darkness that the sun is holding opposes the amount of light that Mercury holds more than the equinox. So Mercury will lose 7 more days of light as he travels towards the equinox. So Mercury has 7 more days of light than the 12-12 equal split between light and dark, and the sun has 7 more days of darkness, or twice as much darkness as Mercury. So this equal dark, equal light that these two planets are holding from the distance to the equinox is said to be an antiscia, or in this case, when it involves the equinoxes instead of the solstice points are called antiscias regular. But the equinoxes are called contra-antiscias, and that's because the light is opposing, right? We have 7 more days of light for Mercury and 7 more days of darkness for the sun. So there is a kind of dark light opposition, or secretive opposition. So we read contra-antiscias like two planets that are in opposition to one another. But because it's not apparent when you look at the chart, because you wouldn't look at Mercury and the sun in this chart and go, oh yeah, they're in opposition. But by light and darkness, they are. So it's more like a secret kind of aspect, you would say. And that's how you read it. You read that there may be secrets that are being held between Mercury and the sun, or Mercury might be holding a secret from the sun, or the sun might be holding a secret from Mercury. So the way that I read this was potential for gossip against bosses or solar kinds of figures, like maybe siblings gossiping about parents, or coworkers kind of getting together around the water cooler and kind of dogging on the boss or something like that. Or it could be the other way around. It could be the boss going, man, look at these lazy workers, or whatever it is. But there could be some secret conversations around mercurial archetypal things that are connected to solar archetypal things. And because it's an opposition, it could be that they are standing on opposite viewpoints, right? So the sun feels like Mercury maybe is doing something and will maybe be feeling a secretive kind of way about it, or Mercury might be talking in secret about the sun. So it's kind of a rebellious energy. And by the time most people get to watch this video, the contra-antiscia will be over. But the reason that I'm going into this anyway is because there are actually 3 contra-antiscias within the month of October here. Technically, this one is outside of October. It's the last day of September, but I'm counting it as one of the 3. But we're going to have a contra-antiscia between Mercury and the sun that is already passed, by the time most people see this. And then there's going to be another one between Venus and the sun, and then between Venus and Mercury coming up in the month of October. So you don't usually get contra-antiscias very much of the time. And my favorite thing about contra-antiscias is this. As many people know, Mercury does not get too far away from the sun. I think it's like, I forget exactly what it is. I think it's like 40 degrees, or it's around a sign away that it can get away from the sun. But of course, it's the closest planet to the sun. So if you look at Mercury in the birth chart or in the mundane chart, the real-time clock, it's always pretty close to the sun. It's maybe a sign behind or a sign ahead, or it's in the same sign. So Mercury will never ever have an actual opposition to the sun, but by contra-antiscia, he will. So that is just fascinating, because this is the only way that we could experience, we get to experience oppositions by many, many planets that are paired in opposite to one another, but we don't ever get to experience that with Mercury, and we don't ever get to experience that with Venus, because Venus likewise doesn't travel that far away from the sun. She's always, one or two signs behind in the same sign, or one or two signs ahead of the sun. So you get sextiles, but you don't get oppositions. So the only time we can experience what a Mercury opposition is like, or a Venus Sun opposition, is through a contra-antiscia secretive aspect. So I'm going to give you some of my keywords that I came up for this. We have potentials like a secret opposition, just the way that it sounds. There might be secret oppositions between things like the media and presidents, or it could be like the press secretary keeping something secret. You know what this reminds me of? Do you ever see those movies where the president has to make a call to the head of a news agency and tell him, for the good of national security, you can't run this story. If people find out before I have time to make my press conference on Monday or whatever, it'll be a disaster. That classic scene where you see the president calling somebody in the media and saying, I know, but please don't run this story because it'll be dangerous or whatever. This is a little bit like that kind of a vibe, where there is just a secrecy around things like leaders, bosses, CEOs, parents, and communications or talks or gossip. So gossip against the boss, or it can be kind of like an anti-authority kind of message, where you may feel or may have noticed that there was a tendency to just be a little bit rebellious against authority figures. It kind of has that witty, clever, I don't really need to follow what the system is doing because, I'm clever. I'm too clever for that. I can get around or bend the rules. It has a little bit of that just rebellious streak. So I apologize. I wish I could have gotten this video out sooner before this, so that people could have kind of been feeling the vibes as it was happening on this day, but time permitting just didn't allow for that one. But there are two more coming up, so we'll get into those here as well. Okay, so now moving on in the month, we have the next thing that is really coming into focus is that this is also a Mercury thing that is happening that is really interesting. Mercury and Mars lose visibility simultaneously on the 1st of October. So let's roll the real-time clock to the 1st now, and we're going to see that the sun is basically equal distance between Mercury and Mars, like kind of right in the middle of those two planets. And when planets get within roughly about 15 degrees ish, that's when they're so close to the sun that if they were visible in the sky and you could see their starlight, that's when typically you won't be able to see them anymore, because the sun's rays are just they're just illuminating the sky way too much, and it drowns out the light of the star. So, and we've talked about this a lot on the channel. Now, Mars is not that bright of a planet, so it's probably already invisible before October the 1st. I would wager it's kind of one of those things where you almost have to go out and actually try to look at it. But the rule of thumb is about 15 degrees. So Mars is about 15 degrees. The sun is catching or closing the gap to Mars, and Mercury's faster. So Mercury's closing the gap to the sun. So very interesting. We have this Mercury Sun contra-antiscia that has the air of secrecy and communications and having something to do with central authority figures or bosses or presidents, that whole solar kind of thing. There's secrecy. And then what happens next is Mercury goes invisible. Well, invisible planets also were talked about as maybe being kind of secret in a way. So both Mars and Mercury kind of go into secrecy a little bit. Now, this secrecy theme is really one that is very, very dominant just in the overall or overarching theme of October. There's just a lot of almost like an Alex Jones or like a Cloak and Dagger, kind of like a conspiracy, almost like a paranoid vibe that I could really see a lot of people falling into. And even if, for people that even aren't interested in world events or whatever and don't follow anything like politics or conspiracy theories or anything like that, just feeling, paranoid about what other people around you are thinking. That could be something that we fall into this month, I think, pretty easily. So that's one of the things that we have to kind of watch out for, because paranoia is not fun to deal with, because you never really know one way or another, and it drives you crazy, right? But we are past the autumnal equinox now. We have entered the dark half of the year, out of summertime. So that's a big change. And when you have planets going from the light half of the year into the dark, that transition, brings that heavier, dark, mysterious kind of quality to it. And we're starting to have planets move across the threshold into the dark half of the year. And so that is kind of the feeling right now, is this big major transition into darkness. Which is kind of fun and romantic in a way, but also, can hold quite the opposite of what we've been having for a long time, especially, with Venus going in the sign of Leo for pretty much all summer long. Which is also something that's going to change here pretty soon. So both of these planets are moving into secrecy as they enter under the beams of the light right around October the 1st. The next thing is going to be that by the 2nd, Mercury will move into an opposition with Neptune. And you can see here is Mercury at 26, just slightly past Neptune here. I've got the real-time clock set to London time, but on the 2nd, depending on where you are, there's going to be this perfected opposition between these two planets. So again, you see how the theme of secrecy or things just kind of ambiguous in a certain way. Mercury contra-antiscia with the sun, Mercury moving into invisibility, and now in opposition to Neptune, you really almost get the themes. And of course, we usually get those classic things where you're going to have such keywords that go along with this, like being confused, or really feeling dreamy, or potentially unsure, or having doubts, and maybe even going into kind of like an escapist mental quality with this, or just being spacey or faded. Now, because Mercury is still exalted in Virgo, even though he's on his ride down out of prominence by this point, meaning Mercury, has been exalted and in his own temple, but he is going to lose that dignity pretty soon. So it's kind of like he's coming down off of a high mountain, and he's slowly coming down and losing some dignity this month. And this is all part of that transition. But while this opposition takes place, the tension between the two planets might be this: attempting to stay grounded and rational, and then feeling the tug or the tension or the stress, feeling like there's something more that is really enticing or really tempting, that has this imaginative kind of quality to it, right? And it's real dreamy. It's like, well, should I just do what I know is the right practical thing to do, or is this the time to really chase that dream? And it's like it might feel tense trying to figure that out. Or you might just sort of bounce back and forth between being really practical and rational one day, and then your head in the clouds the next. So this is a fast-moving aspect, but still, that is part of the early energy of the month of October here. And then by the 5th, this is going to be another Mercury thing that comes along for us. We are finally going to get Mercury moving out of the sign of Virgo into Libra. And this is another planetary, sign-based thing that has been happening for a long time now. We've had Mercury in the sign of Virgo for an extended time because Mercury went to that retrograde. So now Mercury loses dignity And this is a loss of double dignity, right? Because Mercury's homes are Virgo and Gemini. So, of course, planets like to be in their own homes because they feel like they can just be themselves and they have a better ability to enact their natural significations. So, if you want to have a good conversation with somebody, it's a lot easier to do with Mercury in Gemini or Virgo, because it's just like the conversation seems to land. So we've been really enjoying the high prowessness of a great Mercury, I think. And Mercury is in no better place than in Virgo, because not only is he in his home, of course, but he is in his exaltation sign. So Mercury loses exaltation, which means that he was riding high and now he's coming down. And you see that even before he leaves his sign, of course, with the contra-antiscia and so on and so forth. So this is quite interesting. Now, one thing that this reminds me of is kind of the teenage mind becoming a little bit more mature. And that's because, remember that Libra was the exaltation of Saturn. So Saturnine things are kind of lifted up and important, right? And Saturn can sometimes, well, oftentimes slows things down or slows planets down. So you have to imagine that it's almost reads as kind of like that really quick, fast, witty exchange that teenagers have with each other, where, you know, conversations just pinging back and forth at lightning speed. And there's just that really vibrant teenage, youthful mental agility, you know, and it's clever and it's oftentimes has a biting and cynicism that comes into it. But we mature eventually and our minds slow down. And that's good. Because, of course, it's nice to have time to think and not always feel like you know everything, right? So this is a little bit like that, where it's like, oh, I don't know everything, and I'm going to give myself a little bit more time before I respond. So we're going to lose a little bit of mental speed here, but we're also going to get a little bit of maturity, and that's kind of nice. But of course, with Mercury losing dignity, conversations might be mistaken, especially going through the opposition with Neptune, of course. Things like that might happen. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging to get our point across and to feel heard, or to do something technical. It's going to be a little bit more challenging to do those technical communicative things. But we just have to work a little bit harder at it. It's not to say that it can't turn out aesthetically well, but it's going to take a little bit more effort, I think, now that Mercury is in this Saturn exalted sign under the beams, being invisible. So that is one thing that we sort of lose the sharpness or the edge of the mind or the mental quality a little bit here. And this can also mean such things as, like, you could read Mercury losing dignity and going into Venus's sign under the beams as like, having to take care of somebody that you love financially, like the money is burning a hole in your pocket or something like that. So that is one way you could also read the symbolism here. And okay, if we move forward to October the 9th, this is really when things are going to heat up. This is probably the most intense period of the month here. The 9th through the 14th, this second week-ish time period is really when we see quite a lot of things really boiling over or heating up. And this is, of course, the most prominent aspect of the month is coming in here with this Mars square Pluto that pretty much everybody has been talking about. So Mars square Pluto, and if that wasn't enough, we also have Venus moving into Virgo on the same day. So of course, Venus losing her, she's had quite a ride. She went through a retrograde in Leo, but she has okay dignity in Leo. She's not dignified in by being in a place where she calls home, or she's not exalted, and she's not in any kind of detriment or anything like that. But, she is in the sun's temple, so she tends to have that vibrant, star-like beauty or quality to her. And going through the retrograde, might have been about finding authority with the ways in which we love or are in relationships or take pleasure. Venusian things went through kind of a reworked process about things that were really centrally important to each one of us. And that was, that was a very powerful process. It took a long time. And then Venus began to recover as she moved through the sign of Leo. And then there was a mutual reception between Venus and the sun being two signs apart. So after the retrograde, Venus was recovering and she was doing pretty well, and she wasn't being afflicted in any way. She wasn't in a bad sign. But she goes from that to moving into one of the worst places in the zodiac for her. In Virgo, of course, she in ancient astrology was said to be depressed or fallen. So the language of ancient astrology oftentimes is or was used literally. So we could literally imagine that things that were pleasurable all of a sudden feel like they're being pushed down, or maybe there's, we feel depressed around Venusian types of things. And that's a sign, right? That's a sign that for whatever circumstance is happening with us, the omen is saying something about Venusian things are going to be, going on hard right now. They're not going to be easy. It's like they're falling down in bad fortune, or they have to really be worked to sort of brought back up to a place of even just regular kinds of feelings. So Venus going through a tough moment for sure. And on the same day is we get a perfection by Mars making a perfected square to Pluto. So it's always, when I make these videos, I always want to try to stay away from telling people, okay, if you're in a relationship, you're going to break up, because most of the time you're not going to break up. But, there are a lot of people in the world, and if you're in a relationship that is already having cracks in the edifice, this is definitely probably the time at which, people that are not meant to be together and are going through or are in a relationship that it's not working, the cracks are going to become really, exposed right now, and the tension is going to be really, really impressive. But for most of us, it's not going to mean a breakup. But because we're talking about Venus going into depression, Mars in Venus's sign making a square to Pluto, it's interesting that it is a social kind of thing that we're dealing with. So whether it's romantic or not, I guess you could say that this Mars square Pluto is social in nature, because Mars is in Venus's temple and he is the one in the dominant square to Pluto. So classical types of interpretations that you would say for Mars square Pluto is something like an instinctual reaction, a loss of control, a meltdown, speaking truth to power. So the reason that we get some of these keywords here is because when you have Mars, a planet that is already frustrated in Libra, because Mars doesn't like to be in Libra. He's in detriment there. He's in Venus's sign, and it's kind of antithetical to Mars's nature. Mars wants to be Marsy. So he is already trying to figure out, how do I be myself when I'm in this environment that just is so different from what I like to be in? And he's already frustrated and tense about that. And it's difficult for him to navigate Venusian territory, right? He doesn't want to harmonize. He doesn't want to make compromise and think about other people, and and figure out what other people are needing from him. He's really all about, well, I need to establish what I need for me, if by need be, I'm going to go out and take it by the tip of the sword. He's the god of war. He's the god of going out and doing battle to protect the ones that he loves, so he doesn't feel comfortable in a place that's like at a cocktail party where he's, he's meant to just make sure everybody's feelings aren't hurt. That's not Mars's jam. So Mars is already having trouble, struggling, trying to figure out, how does he fit in? And I think that this is the story. How does Mars fit in? And he's like, well, I don't really fit in here, but I think Mars can feel that he's close to being back into Scorpio, one of his own temples. So I feel like Mars is almost sensing that he's almost to a place where he does fit in, but he's not there yet. And it's probably frustrating. As the square perfects to Pluto, Pluto, a god of the underworld, a god of the the hindbrain, or the very deep unconscious place where emotions are driven that we're disconnected from. It's sort of like I've been watching this series Virgin River, and there's this character, Jack. If you've seen this, I've been watching it with my partner. But if you've seen this, he ends up becoming he has a problem with alcohol because he's a vet, and he's having these post-traumatic war episodes. It's like that. It's like there's trauma buried in each one of us, and Mars doesn't feel comfortable. The square is going to release whatever tension or whatever thing is buried and deep and normally is kept under control. Now, some of us are better at this than others. Some of us can ride that Mars-Pluto square wave and still be graceful, and maybe even let a little bit of it out, but not do it in such an ungraceful way. But others of us will have those moments where it just boom, an explosion happens, and out comes the emotions, and you almost watch yourself from above yourself, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, you should really shut up now. This is really bad. Like, this is not a good reaction to have. Why are you doing this? You're going to, it's not going to be good after this is over. And you kind of, if you've ever had that where you will sort of look at yourself and go, why are you doing this to yourself right now? It's bad, but it's just like, you lose control, and it has to come out. This has the tension for that, this kind of an aspect. So definitely, definitely a part of the astrology that everybody's been talking about. So that is the part of the month that, we're just going to have to try to make it through. But it's going to take a lot of conscientious remembering. Like for me personally, when this part of the month comes around, I'm going to be thinking to myself, Mars square Pluto, Mars square Pluto. Don't, like if you have to go do something to get the energy out, do it alone, be careful not to get injured. But by all means, if you're frustrated, do whatever you can to not, sabotage relationships, because that could definitely be an easy thing to do, and it could come out of nowhere, and it could be really hard to even foresee it coming. So instinctual reactions, losing control, meltdowns. And here's an interesting one, speaking truth to power. This is because, Mars in Libra, a sign that is concerned with justice and society, an air sign. And we have Pluto still in Capricorn, a place that is often associated with the edifices of institutional power, right? You get Mars in a Capricorn. That's a really powerful, it's like societal power. This is where I say you get a real streak of kind of like a paranoia that could come in here, where it's like, you really get the sense that maybe in like on the societal level, this is a time where you're going to see, protests and people really, really going against the old established institutional power, in whatever way that is. It might not even have to be old, but typically we think of Capricorn as kind of the older wealth or the older rulers or something like that. But it can be in any place that there is some kind of pervasive institutional power. It can be real easy at this time to really, really, really want to challenge that. So I expect that around this time, there's going to be some pretty lively and hopefully not tragic, but pretty powerful news stories may be coming up around this time for sure. Now, on October the 10th here, if we roll the real-time clock forward just one day, we're going to go to where we are going to see now that Venus will make an opposition to Saturn. So this is just kind of a little bit of some more tough things for Venus to deal with. right? She's already in the sign where she's depressed. She's lost a lot of dignity. And now she's facing an opposition to Saturn, a god that says, I don't care. You're on your own. I don't, So this could be a moment where you do feel that sense of like, if there's something that needs to be done, like a responsibility or a duty or like a chore or some hard work, it may feel as though you have to shoulder that burden all by yourself, or it may feel like there's a sense of loneliness or isolation. And this can often bring about alienation in relationships as well. So there's a sense that it may feel pretty hard to have those pleasurable moments with others at this time. Like you're kind of alienated, or you somehow can't fit in, or something like that. So Venus is going through a little bit of a hard time here. Now, also on October the 10th, we will get our second antiscia of the period, and this is going to be a Venus-Mars antiscia. So let's go through this again. Here is Venus at 1 degree and 39 minutes inside of Virgo. And you'll see that here is Mars at 29 degrees and 11 minutes, inside of Libra. So so Venus has about 29 degrees or a little bit less to go before she gets to the exact equinox point. And Mars is about 29 degrees and change past the equinox point. So Venus has 29 more degrees of light than the equal day, equal night. Mars has been past the equal day, equal night, and he has lost 29 more moments of light, or more units of light, or whatever, days of light. And so he's holding, you could think of it as like darkness, more than the equinox, about 29 days. So they're forming a secretive opposition to one another. So that is kind of a nuance that, when you see Venus going through an opposition with Saturn like that, and feeling like she's getting the cold shoulder or isolated, and then there's like this secretive opposition between the lover planets. Mars is tense. He's going through that square with Pluto. This is definitely going to be some pretty tense moments with social situations for sure. And let's see, we could get such things as secret sexuality. This could be a theme that is coming up right now, or secret desires, secret plans to move on, or feeling secretly opposed or unheard. These are all things that might come up. Also, on the same day, this is more of kind of a minor thing with Mercury here, but we also get Mercury now entering under combustion. This means that Mercury is now within 7 or 8 degrees of the sun, closing the gap to work his way towards a conjunction or cazimi with the sun. But Mercury closing the gap and really under the powerful beams of the sun. Now, it wasn't that long ago that Mercury was in a combustion, but this happened while Mercury and the sun were both in Virgo. And Mercury, when planets are combust within their own temples, or signs as they're also known, it's as if they have a roof to shelter them from the really harsh rays. If you think about, a planet being at home, it's like they're not at the beach getting sunburned. But now Mercury is not in his temple any longer. He is in a temple that is, it's like the real estate of Venus. So he doesn't have any dignity, or he doesn't have any of his own resources to protect himself from the harsh rays of the sun. So this is quite a powerful maltreatment. The sun becomes almost like a malefic planet to Mercury, maltreating Mercury. And this is really interesting because Mercury is in direct motion. So this isn't a combust while Mercury is retrograde. Retrograde planets tend to represent planets that have fallen back into fate, things that are out of control. You're just fallen back into the primary motion of the sky that pulls everything along with it. And that was seen as a symbol of like, oh, the planet has lost willpower or lost autonomy, or is just going through a fated thing that he has no control over. But Mercury and planets going in direct motion represents right now that Mercury is heading of his own willpower or volition. So it's interesting when you see a planet heading towards the sun. It's kind of like the Icarus story in a way, but it's a planet that essentially is, for whatever reason, heading into dangerous territory willingly. So again, this might be something like needing to care for a person in a loved one, like it could be like a father, like if your father was sick and you had to take care of him, but it was costing a lot of money. Mercury burnt under the beams. That could be one interpretation of it. Or if you're dating somebody, but you're spending all your money on the dates and stuff like that, that could be another way where you see money just getting burnt up. But it could be a number of other things like communication. It could be that you have to be around a boss, but you just don't feel heard, and you're just forced to have to do it because you really want to get the promotion, and so you're really making the effort to to be in the situations that he'll notice you. These are just different ways that you could interpret that. So imagine the sun as representing some kind of authority figure, ruler, boss, CEO, and very important person. And how is the Mercury archetype, whether that's communication or feeling heard or things related to money or budget, how are those things being maltreated or harmed by that circumstance that is related to the solar archetypal thing? That's what we're looking at right now. Now, if we roll the real-time clock forward to October the 12th, we get Mars entering Scorpio. So this is all within just a few days here that we have a lot of powerful things happening. And this is one of the better things of the month because we get a planet moving into his own temple, and planets entering their own temples. Even though this is Mars and Mars is a malefic, this is probably the best dignified planet of the month, really. And so this is really interesting because Mars has recently gone through that square with Pluto's, and he was, previously in a sign where he did not feel like he belonged. So when I think of Mars as a planet that oftentimes represents in a kind of independence, it's like Mars likes to do things on his own, or he likes to not ask for help and just get it done with his own hands. He likes to be independent. He likes to be an entrepreneur. He likes to go it alone if he has to. He's the lone rider that prefers it that way, right? And there's almost, you can see kind of a story coming into focus here. You've got Venusian things really going through hard times, and now you have Mars just aching to get out of a situation that he doesn't feel like he can be himself. And then all of a sudden you see him moving into a sign where he's completely himself. So I could see stories like people leaving a situation or relationship where it's like, oh, thank God, I was stuck in this situation where I just could never be myself, and now I feel like I can, but I'm on my own, right? The opposition between Venus and Saturn. You can sort of see that picture sort of coming into focus. So I think that Mars is going to represent a kind of independence. But if there was a more explosive situation that happened with the Mars square Pluto, where there was kind of a reaction by somebody or by us, this could be the aftermath where it's like, things sort of exploded a little bit, and now I'm going it the long haul. I'm really going to have to fortify my position for the long haul. And that's because Mars is in a solid or fixed sign, right? The difference here between Aries and Scorpio, both Mars-ruled signs in traditional astrology. In modern astrology, of course, Pluto rules Scorpio, but as a practicing traditional astrologer, I go with the traditional rulership scheme here. And the difference between Mars as the ruler of Aries, or Mars is the characteristic of Aries, and Mars as the characteristic of Scorpio, is the cardinality here. The cardinal way that Mars has a burst of energy to turn things into a new season is how we characterize Mars in Aries, right? Aries is the sign that takes winter and brings it into spring. And so Aries are often have that characteristic of having a burst of action or a burst of inceptional energy that really pushes things forward. But oftentimes Aries people are criticized for not being able to follow through or keep that up, right? They sort of, the energy bursts out and then that's it. And that may not be true for all Aries, by the way, but that's sort of the stereotype. And have you ever heard the stereotype for a Scorpio that, man, they really hold a grudge? You know, don't make a Scorpio mad. They will never forget. Well, that is the difference with Mars and Scorpio. Mars, what is a grudge? A grudge, I guess one way you could think of it is like a grudge is when somebody hurts you and you say, you did that. I'm not going to forget. I have to remain vigilant or on guard against you doing that again. That's Mars and Scorpio. So Mars moves into out of a cardinal sign and into a solid or fixed sign. So the omen or symbolism to me is that the vigilance must continue and the vigilance must be had for like the long haul. So for instance, if this was a time where, you know, there's a couple that are going through the process of asking for a divorce from one another, this would be the time where it's like, okay, but now that you've said that, the Mars-Pluto square, it all came out. Now you're going to have to ante up and get the lawyer, and it's going to take a while. You know, it's not going to be a quick process. We got to divvy up the finances. We're going to fight for all the stuff and who gets custody. It's a long process. So Mars might be independent, but Mars also might be representing here that if there was something of a reaction, we could be dealing with the aftermath, and the aftermath could be speaking to like, okay, here you are, but now you're here for a while. So if you've defined yourself, you got to hold that definition. If you're independent, you got to remain independent. You know, it has a little bit of that kind of an omen quality to it. Or at least that's the way I would read it, as Mars moving into a fixed sign where he's completely capable of being Marsy. And that's the thing. Mars is completely capable. He now feels like I can remain defensive if I need to defend something. I can remain defined if I need to define something. I can remain independent if I don't want to be in situations that I don't want to be in. That's Mars being very capable, which wasn't the situation when he was still in Libra. So that's coming on the 12th. And if we go now to the 13th, the energy also gets more interesting with Mars because Mars now will make and perfect a trine to Saturn. So again, it's almost like a doubling up of the signification of that sustained kind of energy that Mars will be engaged with. It's like the vigilance will be held and kept and solidified. That trine with Saturn makes it really solid. It also could read as that emotions are becoming stable. Like if there's some emotional volatility with Saturn in Pisces, Mars might say, you got to wipe the tears away, Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. You know, like somebody telling Kurt Cobain, like, this angst is getting a little old. Like at some point, we really just need to kind of let go and move on and, you know, kind of toughen up a little bit. It could be a little bit like that. Or it could be very powerful emotions that are like the reason that you would hold on to anger or hold on to a grudge or try to be on your own is really emotionally dominant. It's coming from this emotional place. That's the reason. It's may not be heady or rational so much as it's just emotive. It's like you just feel deep down in your core instinct that this is what you need, you know. That's kind of the way that I would read it. But it could be a positive aspect, of course, for people trying to accomplish or get projects done. and having that sustained energy to work hard and just follow through and keep it up until you reach the level of achievement that you really want to reach. So that's the power and positive thing of Mars in Scorpio. Now, if we go forward to October the 14th, we are going to get to our first eclipse of the month. And this is a total solar eclipse at about 21 degrees of Libra here. And this is a south node eclipse. So a lot of astrologers have been talking about the fact that this is a south node eclipse. So essentially what you get is you get three things here. You get the fact that this eclipse is happening in a Venus temple or a Venus sign of Libra. So it probably has something to do with relationships or pleasure. And then a solar eclipse is a new moon. So new moons typically are about beginnings of some kind, and eclipses as new moons, or solar eclipses as new moons, are going to be extremely powerful new moons that sort of radiate out. But some people think between 6 months to a year. It's like sometime there is a overarching cycle that we're talking about that is sort of starting over, that will last 18 years, and then the midpoint will be 9 years. So we're talking about a bigger cycle that is sort of happening right now that represents some kind of beginning, and it's happening in the sign of Venus's domicile of Libra, but it's a south node thing. So when you basically combine Venus and the new beginning and the south node tends to represent kind of a diminishment of things decreasing or being let go of or being lost, or wanting to surrender and move away from something willingly. The south node has that traditional symbolism of not lusting or chasing after something in the world, but sort of refraining and potentially letting go. So one way that you could read this is a new beginning or a new attempt to let go of something that has to do with pleasure, or something that has to do with a relationship. So it could be read as like, I don't want to be in this kind of relationship, or I don't want to be in this kind of social situation with friends, or I need to be with different kinds of people because I feel like I'm entering a new phase in my life. Or it could be giving up a pleasure of some kind where it just feels like, you know what, I used to really enjoy this and get a lot of pleasure from this, but maybe it's not so healthy. Maybe this isn't who I really want to be. So there's kind of this new beginning around something Venusian that is meant to sort of be the beginning of how you release or let go of something Venusian. And it could be social in nature, or it could be something about our creativity, or it could be something about just something that we have had a long pastime in enjoying. For me, I'll give you an example of this. For me, it is definitely going back to a diet that I had many years ago that was a really positive diet. I went to my doctor after being on this diet for a year, and he was just so impressed with how healthy I was, but I've never been able to go back to this diet. Well, about a week ago, all of a sudden, out of the blue, I just had so much determination. I just was like, that's it. I'm going to go back to it. And it was just easy. It didn't even require work. And so far so good. Who knows how long it'll last? As most people know, diets are notoriously hard to keep. But for me, that's what it was. It was letting go of the pleasure of the food that I used to enjoy, because I would rather have a new beginning with what I feel like is more better for myself or my health. That's sort of how I have noticed this already. And because eclipses, are just so broad in time, they're not really meant to, usually the thing that they're about isn't happening right on the eclipse. It's usually, you'll notice it before or after, and people say anywhere from 6 months to a year. So that is that is the big cycle that is also starting in the middle of the month that is really making the month dynamic here. So now if we roll forward to, actually, before we do, let me just put one more thing in here about the eclipse. So the eclipse is visible in Oregon, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, Yucatan, Central America, Colombia, Brazil, and specifically this city in Brazil called Natal. Now, it's partially visible in a much wider range on both sides of these locations. But if you were born, you can always go to timeanddate.com and it'll give you a video, like a real-time video of the eclipse's path across where it's visible or most visible. And if you have a birth chart if you were born in any of those regions like Oregon, that whole swath kind of down through the Northwest, through the Southwest, or into Central America or northern half of South America, if you have a birth chart for that area, one thing that eclipses are typically going to be noticed more strongly is if you have a birth chart in the area that the eclipse is visible at the time. So if there is an eclipse and you can find out where it's visible, if your birth chart isn't in that zone, it might be that the eclipse isn't really going to impact you that strongly. It'll probably have some effect, but if you have a birth chart, like for instance, if you were born in Oregon or Utah or New Mexico or Texas, this could be an eclipse that is much more potent or personal to you. So that's one thing that we have to also remember when it comes to eclipses. Okay, but if we roll the real-time clock forward to October the 16th, just a few days later now, we are going to get to a Venus-Sun contra-antiscia. So this is our you know what? I said there were 3 contra-anticias. I think there are actually 4 contra-anticias. So this is pretty wild. Venus-Sun contra-antiscia. So now we have really secretive things happening between Venus and the Sun. And like the Mercury-Sun contra-antiscia, Venus and the Sun can never physically be in an opposition. But this is like a Venus-Sun opposition where there are secrets between Venusian things and solar things. So that is very, very interesting. So on the 16th, you really, really want to tune in and feel the vibes, because it's a very special transit that will, very rare to have that kind of an oppositional energy between Venus and the Sun. Balance returning to all the Venus and Leo kinds of things could be at foot here. Walking away from pursuits of pleasure, passion, or love, giving up on social decorum, abandoning the moral authority. That whole combination of how would Venus be opposing solar kinds of things, right? So you get something like you're at a party and you're like, you know what, I'm so tired of I'm so tired of what I'm supposed to do. I'm just gonna be a rebel. I'm just gonna say what I want to say, or express myself, or just be whoever, dress how I want to dress. You could be, there's a little bit of kind of like this social outsider kind of quality to it, just abandoning the moral authority of a situation. Or feeling like there's a tension again with having to give up some pleasure, passion, love, relationship. That could also be something that is really part of this as well. But because, this is the really nuanced, interesting part for me, because Venus has spent so long in the Sun's temple of Leo over the summer. It's odd that you should, Venus spends all this time in the Sun's house, and then it's like all of a sudden she's in an opposition with him in the form of a light and dark opposition. So it's almost like, was Venus being in the Sun's house, did something become too solar with Venus, and now there needs to be a kind of leveling of that, where she sort of pulls back and says, not only am I not going to be solar, but I'm going to be like opposite to solar, right? So it kind of you get that sense that maybe she is like the social outsider, or the social rebel, or the like women that would, adopt a new style, and it might be shocking at first or something like that. So that is also a really interesting aspect that is coming. And then just the next day, because a lot of planets are just simply straddling both sides of the autumnal equinox moment here. The next day we get a Venus-Mercury contra-antiscia. So it's all going to be kind of the same symbolism now. Now you're thinking kind of opposite to Venusian things. There's an oppositional tension where it's like you might be expressing yourself different than you look, or you might be shocking people with appearing one way but thinking another, or something along those lines. But it's just a real rebellious kind of, and of course, because these are antishas, you bring in the secrecy aspects. So are there things like, secrets between lovers, or secret relationships, or clandestine picnics, or something like that. So that is I believe the fourth antiscia of the month. So normally you don't, you get a couple of antishas a year, if that at all. So quite extraordinary here. Now, speaking of Mercury things, if we go forward to the 20th, we're going to get finally the Mercury Sun Cazimi on the 20th. And this is going to be really a positive thing in the month, because Mercury will now be empowered with the sun instead of being beat up by the sun. Now he's going to be sort of endowed with all of the majesty of the sun, which is going to be really nice. So think of an empowerment of ideas, where it's like all of a sudden the clarity, just like the focus, just comes into view with what you know. Where there begins to be the stirring of like an understanding of what the whole process has been like. It's like Jerry Garcia said, what a strange and wonderful time it's been. It's sort of, this is the moment where you sort of have that realization about what the Venusian circumstances around you have been, whether that's dealing with relationships or social situations or friends, or a battle with pleasures, or desire, or something along those lines. So Mercury will begin to improve from this point forward, and recover out of the detrimental rays of the sun. And if we go forward now to October the 22nd, we're going to get one of the most positive aspects of the month here. We're going to get a Venus trine Jupiter aspect. Now, a lot of astrologers have been talking about, oh, this is really good because we have Venus and Jupiter in a trine, and like, what's better than that? We're talking about both the benefics in a positive trine aspect with one another. It doesn't really get better than that. But I sort of wonder how much good this aspect can bring forth. It'll definitely bring some. It'll definitely soothe the kind of frazzled nerves, I think, by this point, with everything that's been really intense. This Venus-Jupiter square is going to really soothe us and bring us down to a place of groundation. Both planets are in Earth signs. But, we also have to remember that this isn't going to be like the best Venus trine Jupiter aspect that you could have, because we have Jupiter retrograde. And retrograde benefics sometimes are kind of weak. They don't really give that much good. And Venus is, again, in depression. So if she gives something, she might give something that you don't want. Like, she might give you a meal at a restaurant after you swore you were not going to eat that kind of, you were going to have something healthy. And then all of a sudden, you're at a restaurant and she says, well, just what the hell? I'm just going to order the super decadent dessert or something, like, and it's, so she might give you something that you want, but you don't want at the same time, kind of a thing. So that's one quality. And Jupiter might be a little bit weak in the support, but be that as it may, there still should be something positive, something supportive, the ability to feel grounded or get support from people that are really earthy, people that are of the soil of the family, or the very down to earth kind of people that might be people that are really coming in to help you out at this point. So it's going to be something good, but it may not be the best trine. And I think a lot of astrologers are talking about this like it's really going to be amazing. And maybe they're right. Maybe it will. But I sort of hold back a little bit because of the dignity between these two planets. But it will definitely bring about, I think, a lot of soothing. And we really need soothing by this point in the month, because there are a lot of heavy stuff that is happening. Okay. And if we go forward now to October the 23rd, we're going to get one of my favorite moments of the year. This is going to be the time that the sun moves into Scorpio. So big dignity change for the sun. The sun moves out of the sign of his depression. So great news if if you've been struggling with illness, or if you've had a loved one struggling with illness, if your father has been ill, or you've been having a really hard time with your boss at work, or solar things in general are going to improve by this point, which is awesome. Now this is also a time where it'll be very clear, though, with so many planets in Scorpio by this point, it'll begin to, there'll be a lot of clarity about what you need to be vigilant. What is it that you have to make sure to be on guard for? Scorpio is all about casing the situation and being the watch person that keeps watch and make sure that nothing bad comes. So that can be a little bit paranoid, but I think for the most part, this is really representing that even though we're having to be vigilant, we're also maybe being an advocate for things and sticking up for people in what is right. And that can feel really good. And I think that it's just going to feel better for us in general, that planets are beginning to move into better dignity. And so the intensity of the previous 2 weeks of October is beginning to heal now by this point, I think. And if we go to October the 24th, just the next day, just like Mars and Mercury did when they entered Scorpio, making that trine to Saturn. Now it's the sun's turn to make a trine to Saturn. So we get more of that really practical, earthy, or not earthy. We get more of that, maybe the stabilization of emotions, where there's the ability to really maybe be soothed or calmed down in our emotional state, and we can sort of sustain that state for a while because we're having so many planets in a solid sign here, and making this positive aspect to Saturn. It's a planet that obviously likes to make things slow down and make things as mature or conservative as possible. So that's a positive thing. Also, again, we have Saturn in retrograde in Pisces, a pretty emotional Saturn, and these are dominant trines that these planets are making. So it also makes you wonder if the sun isn't giving some vitality to ways in which we've been a little bit dissatisfied with certain things. It's like maybe all of a sudden, instead of feeling dissatisfied and wallowing, we're able to sort of just say, you know what, let's just do something about it. That's a really positive thing, I think. And if we go forward now to nearly the end of the month, by October the 28th, we are going to get to the Mars opposition to Jupiter. Now I have the exact time here at 3:44 p.m. This is Greenwich time here because this is London time, but we're going to get this opposition that it happens to Jupiter at the same time that we get a partial lunar eclipse at 5 degrees of Taurus at 8:24. So there's a little bit of lag time, but right around this end of the month here, we get a couple of things that are really, really interesting happening all at once. And this this partial lunar eclipse is actually only visible in a very small part of the world. It's really just northern eastern Africa, over Somalia. So it's pretty interesting. So I think that this lunar eclipse is not going to be that powerful, although it definitely will be noticed. It will have an effect, but I don't think it's going to be the really scary kinds of lunar eclipses that people tend to get worried about. So I wouldn't worry about it. It'll definitely be felt and have some resonant power to it, but I don't think it's not like an omen for like the worst case scenario for almost anybody, I think, because it's a partial lunar eclipse and because it just doesn't have a long visible region that it is visible in. Interpretations for this could be something like just basic interruptions. When you have a lunar eclipse in Taurus, it's like Taurus represents that place that is connected to like the garden, and it's stable, and it's about abundance and good fortune and your cows in the springtime having milk. And so when you get the eclipse of the exalted moon, that's a really fascinating symbol, because it's like you have a planet that's exalted that temporarily gets killed off. One way that you might read that is just an interruption in something that's going along well. But it may not be the worst case scenario interruption, but an interruption nonetheless, perhaps. But it could be like a sobering unpleasantness, just general unpleasantness or misfortune when things seem to be clicking along just fine. Or I think at its extreme end, or its most negative extreme end, it could be falls from hubris. Because if you think about the moon traveling through Taurus, being exalted and lifted up, having the light all of a sudden be killed off while you're riding high sort of denotes that you might have to be careful about such things. It's like spending too much money, or being too extravagant, or having too big of a social situation where you're just maybe acting in hubris or arrogant or something like that. But if arrogance and hubris and self-righteousness will probably have their wings clipped if that is behavior that is being shown at that time. So just something to watch out for. Most of us don't probably act like that anyway, but there are times, of course, when we all do. And this might be a time where if you're sort of riding high, your wings could be clipped a little bit. Something riding high or exaggerated suffers a fall or setback, taking down the last remnants of the past. We've got these. This is the second eclipse of the month, and the one previous to this on the 14th was that that new beginning, new moon, total solar eclipse that was conjunct with the South Node. So it's like there definitely is a broad theme of like trying to move on or release from something in a new way, try something in a new way. And this second eclipse might serve as like kind of like a pairing to that says, okay, you feel like you're ready to let this go, but now we're actually gonna, we're gonna chop it off. That could be part of the symbolism here as well. And on the October the 29th here, we get another member of the party comes into the same kind of cluster of planets. Just a day later, we have a Mercury-Mars conjunction. And so now Mercury and Mars are conjoining at about 12 degrees of Scorpio and making that opposition over to Jupiter. Mars and Jupiter. With Jupiter retrograde in Venus's temple of Taurus and Mars being very vigilant and capable in Scorpio, the basic signature that I kind of wonder about is, what are we having to remain vigilant about that might be too blown up or too extravagant, or that Jupiter over extravagant or over pleasurable or overdoing it, over sociable, too much affection or, just eating too much or anything like that. It's like Mars is making that opposition, saying, I have to really be careful about this. I'm really keeping a watchful eye on this. And if something gets blown up too big, I'm going to be there to sort of keep the oath, right? Keep the promise, keep the defined boundary. Let's say if there was a situation where you have left a relationship as symbolized by Venus going through all these hard things this month, and Mars representing sort of being independent or on your own in Scorpio. This could be, for instance, just as an example, or like a story that you could say that would fit the symbolism here, would be something like they come, it's like there's an enticing moment where it's like, maybe we should get back together, but Mars feels like, I don't know, I'm liking this independence, but there's that kind of tug of war oppositional feeling that you would get from Mars and Jupiter being in an opposition, where it's like, should I go back to this situation, or do I need to stay vigilant and on my own over here? So that is wrapping up the month. And then we get the last thing of the month is Halloween. On October the 31st, we have Mars entering combustion. So this is when we have the sun closing the gap, being the faster planet, closing the gap between itself and Mars. And now Mars is now very much under the rays and the intense combustion of 7 or 8 degrees within range of the sun. But this probably is going to be pretty mitigated, because we have Mars in his own temple. So it's like he has the roof over his head, or he has the resources to sort of deal with the harsh rays. There still might be a kind of maltreatment that Mars is feeling kind of pressured or hot under the collar, and probably is uncomfortable and doesn't like it. So there might be circumstances that just you don't like, and it feels like it's heating you up and making you angry. But for whatever reason, you have the emotional control to sort of deal with it, or you have the ability to say, I don't need to put up with this, I can be on my own. So while uncomfortable, Mars is very capable of dealing with the situation. And that wraps up the month. So that is the month of October. Thanks everybody for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this. Now, during the weeks ahead, we will take a closer look at the most important aspects of the week on a weekly basis. So come back and tune into the episodes each Monday if you want to get a little bit in depth. For the monthly overviews, there are so many aspects typically that are happening in a month. I don't have time to really dig deep into them, and some of them are really interesting. So this being one of the most interesting months of the year, I'm going to have fun really digging a little bit deeper into this, and in particular into some of these anticias. So we'll do some more in-depth analysis and delineations for these transits happening in October as the month unfolds. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye for now.